In June 2019, Bill Gates stood in front of venture capital founders and admitted something that almost no one at his level has ever done. He said that the single greatest mistake of his career was losing an operating system market to a competitor, one that ran on Linux. That same competitor is now doing to the Windows desktop what it did to Windows on mobile. It is eating market share. Systematically, year after year. There is a number from Microsoft's own cloud platform that will tell you everything you need to know about where this is heading. I will give you that number in a while, and once you hear it, you will understand why some analysts believe Gates' biggest regret is a pattern that is still playing out on your desktop right now. As of early 2025, more than 65% of all workloads running on Microsoft's own cloud platform, Azure, run on Linux. Microsoft confirmed that figure itself in a quarterly update published on the Microsoft Community Hub in February 2025. The company that built its entire identity on Windows now operates a cloud empire where Windows is the minority operating system. And it gets more specific than that. Microsoft has built and published its own Linux distribution called Azure Linux. Version 4.0 went into public preview in May 2026. Microsoft ships a Linux operating system. That is the sentence that would have been considered science fiction in the year 2000. Now layer in what happened on mobile. Bill Gates publicly stated at a Village Global event in June 2019 that the mobile operating system market he failed to win was worth an estimated $400 billion. The system that won it was Android, and Android is built on the Linux kernel, the same foundation that now powers the majority of Microsoft's cloud infrastructure. Gates said, in the software world, in particular for platforms, these are winners take all markets. He said Linux-based Android won mobile because Microsoft was distracted, mismanaged the opportunity, and never assigned the right people to the job. So, the question is, if Linux beat Microsoft, once in a platform market Gates said was clearly theirs to win, why should the desktop be any different? And I have an answer to that question. But first, you need to understand how Microsoft let this happen the first time. Microsoft in 2000 was not a company in decline. It was the most dominant technology company on Earth. Windows ran on more than 90% of personal computers. Bill Gates had built something that had never existed before, a software monopoly so complete that the United States government took him to court over it. That antitrust trial, United States versus Microsoft, ran from 1998 through 2001, and Gates has said directly that the distraction it caused was one of the reasons Microsoft missed mobile. He told the audience at the Economic Club of Washington in the same year he made his Android admission, "We were distracted during our antitrust trial. We didn't assign the best people to do the work." Microsoft had a mobile operating system in development. It was called Windows Mobile. They knew the smartphone market was coming. They were working on it. But the antitrust fight consumed executive attention at exactly the moment the company needed to be moving fast. Meanwhile, in 2005, Google quietly acquired a small startup called Android for $50 million. Google changed the product after Apple launched the iPhone in 2007. By September 2008, the first Android device was on the market. By 2010, Android was growing faster than any platform in the history of consumer technology. Microsoft's response, under then CEO Steve Ballmer, was initially to dismiss the iPhone entirely. Ballmer famously called it the most expensive phone in the world that wouldn't appeal to business customers because it lacked a keyboard. He would later be replaced as CEO by Satya Nadella, who took over in 2014 and eventually discontinued Windows Phone altogether. The mobile market was lost. Gates estimates its value at $400 billion, and that is a conservative estimate by today's standards. Android, built on Linux, captured it. Every smartphone on Earth that is not made by Apple runs on a Linux kernel. Gates knew exactly what that meant. He called it his greatest mistake ever and moved on. The turning point on the desktop is not a single dramatic moment. It is a pressure point that Microsoft created itself, and the name of that pressure point is Windows 11. On October 14, 2025, Microsoft ended support for Windows 10. That is the operating system that had powered the majority of the world's personal computers for a full decade. Industry estimates placed the install base at roughly 400 million devices at the moment support ended. A meaningful percentage of those machines could not run Windows 11, not because they were slow, because they lacked a hardware security chip called TPM 2.0 or didn't meet the secure boot requirements Microsoft built into Windows 11. Perfectly functional computers, completely locked out. Microsoft's offer to those users was blunt. Pay $30 per year for an extended security update subscription, accessible only with a Microsoft account, or buy a new computer. Those were the choices they were given by the company that had sold them their operating system. For millions of people watching this happen, it felt like a betrayal. And for the first time in a long time, a real alternative existed that was ready to receive them. Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Pop! OS. Distributions built specifically to look and feel familiar to people coming off Windows. Free to download, free forever, running on hardware that Windows 11 rejected, and within the Linux community, a coordinated effort called End of 10 launched specifically to help Windows 10 refugees make the switch. The project, backed by KDE, one of the largest Linux desktop projects in the world, offered guides, local support groups, and a clear message: your computer is not obsolete. Microsoft just wants you to think it is. The result was a measurable, documented shift in Linux desktop usage. And while much of the attention around that shift has focused on dramatic headline numbers that need to be interpreted carefully, the underlying trend is not in dispute. But what that trend actually looks like and what it means for the future of your computer is something I want to be precise about. Because this is where the story gets genuinely complicated. Remember what Gates said: in software platform markets, if you fall behind, you are on your way to complete doom. He was talking about mobile. He was describing a mistake he had already made. The question now is whether the data on the desktop is telling us the same story is starting again. And the answer to that question requires you to understand something that went badly wrong in the press just a few weeks ago. In early July 2026, a headline spread across the technology press. StatCounter, the web analytics firm that tracks operating system usage across more than 1 million websites, appeared to show Windows falling below 60% of global desktop share for the first time in years, to 56.55%, with Linux reaching 4.39%. The story exploded. Linux fan sites celebrated. Tech reporters wrote about a historic milestone. Then StatCounter corrected the data. The company acknowledged a classification error. A large segment of web traffic had been miscategorized as unknown rather than Windows, artificially deflating the Windows number. The corrected figure placed Windows closer to 72%. The dramatic below 60 headline was a reporting error, not a real milestone. I am telling you this because Rule 1 of this channel is that the facts carry the weight, and we do not inflate facts to tell a better story. The story is already good enough without the inflation. Windows desktop share has been declining for years. StatCounter's long-term data indicates Linux desktop usage in the United States reached somewhere in the region of 5% in mid-2025, figures that vary depending on the measurement window, but which represent a clear multi-year upward trend from numbers that barely registered a decade ago. The Steam gaming platform, which surveys millions of active PC gamers every month, recorded Linux usage crossing 5% of its user base earlier in 2026, a milestone in a segment that was essentially zero for Linux just 5 years prior. These are not dramatic numbers in isolation. In the context of a platform that spent 30 years at less than 2%, they represent something genuinely different happening. Meanwhile, the structural story is not about desktop percentages at all. The structural story is what Microsoft's own behavior tells you. The company that Steve Ballmer once called a cancer, and yes, that was Ballmer in 2001, not Gates, and the attribution matters, now pays engineers full-time to build and maintain Linux. Microsoft has not simply tolerated Linux. It has become one of the largest contributors to the Linux ecosystem on Earth. That is how completely the ground has shifted beneath Microsoft's feet since the days when their own CEO compared open source software to a disease. The desktop is the last wall, and there is a group of real people now standing at that wall with a battering ram. Their story is the part of this that will stay with you. PewDiePie, Felix Kjellberg, has 110 million subscribers on YouTube. He is one of the most watched content creators on Earth, and he built his career on gaming on Windows. In April 2025, he published a video titled "I installed Linux, so should you." He opened the video by saying he had been tortured by Windows for years. He said that Windows talks to users like they are babies, pushing Candy Crush, defaulting to Bing, forcing Cortana, serving advertisements inside an operating system people had already paid for. He showed his audience Linux Mint. He showed them that his games worked. He showed them that you can customize an operating system without corporate permission. His video pulled millions of views. It was not a niche Linux forum post. It was the largest gaming YouTuber on Earth telling his audience that he switched and that the switch was worth it. He is not an isolated case. He is the visible face of something much larger. The End of 10 project, backed by members of the KDE Linux desktop community, reported that in the months following Windows 10's end of support, they were fielding inquiries from ordinary users who had never heard of Linux before. Not developers, not IT professionals, retirees, teachers, people who had used Windows their entire lives and were not going to spend money on a new computer to satisfy Microsoft's hardware checklist. Think about what that audience looks like. Someone who bought a laptop 5 or 6 years ago. It runs perfectly. It does everything they need. Microsoft just told them it is no longer supported. They go looking for options. They find that a free operating system exists that will run on their hardware indefinitely, without ads, without forced Microsoft account sign-ins, without Copilot being embedded into their taskbar. And they try it. That is the human story behind the market share data, not developers switching to Arch Linux because they enjoy reading documentation. Ordinary people, in large numbers, discovering that they have a choice they did not know existed because Microsoft's own decisions pushed them toward the door. And that brings us to the question, is this shift reversible? Does Microsoft have the tools to stop it? That answer is not simple. Windows still runs on approximately 72% of the world's desktops by the most recent corrected data. It runs on 94% of gaming PCs according to Steam's own hardware survey. Every major commercial software package, accounting tools, enterprise applications, specialized industry software, is built for Windows first, if not exclusively. Microsoft has a commercial ecosystem lock that Linux cannot easily crack in the near term. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said in April 2026 that the company is refocusing on what he called fundamentals, quality, performance, and serving core users better. That is a direct acknowledgement that the company had drifted from what its users actually wanted. If Microsoft follows through on that, it removes one of the primary reasons people are looking for alternatives in the first place. And Microsoft's pivot to cloud and AI is not weakness, it is strategy. Even if Windows slowly cedes desktop share, Microsoft collects revenue through Azure, through Microsoft 365 subscriptions, through GitHub, through LinkedIn. The company's commercial backlog stood at $627 billion as of early 2026. Microsoft losing the desktop would hurt. It would not kill the company. Linux has never been easier to use than it is today. That is not hyperbole. Linux Mint, Ubuntu, and Pop! OS now install with graphical wizards that walk users through every step. The software library has expanded dramatically. Gaming on Linux through Valve's Proton compatibility layer now supports thousands of titles that previously required Windows. The generational pressure is real. Every developer entering the workforce today has spent years working in Linux environments because that is what the cloud runs on. Every enterprise IT team managing Azure infrastructure is already managing Linux day to day. The desktop is surrounded on all sides by an ecosystem that has already made the switch, and the people making decisions about what gets built next are living in that ecosystem. And there is a strategic argument worth sitting with. Gates said that in platform markets, if you fall behind on users and momentum, you are on your way to complete doom. He was describing a process that took years on mobile, not days. Nobody is arguing. Windows disappears from the desktop this decade, but the structural conditions he identified, a distracted vendor, a growing alternative, users who feel pushed rather than served, those conditions exist on the desktop today in a way they have never existed before. The question is not whether this is happening, the question is how far it goes. The interesting thing about Bill Gates admitting his greatest mistake is that he identified the warning sign precisely. He just didn't apply it to the platform he was still running. When Gates made that admission in 2019, most people heard it as a history lesson, a powerful man being unusually candid about a mistake from 15 years earlier. Interesting, unusual, file it away. What it was is a blueprint. Gates described exactly what happens when a dominant software platform gets distracted, fails to serve its users, and lets an open-source competitor build momentum in the background. He described it in precise, specific terms. He named the mechanism. He named the market. He named the operating system that beat him. That operating system's kernel is now running on the majority of Microsoft's own cloud. It is running on the most powerful computers on Earth. It is running on every Android phone in the world. And it is now running, in growing numbers, on the same kind of desktop machines that Microsoft just told millions of people they could no longer use. Gates called it his greatest mistake ever. 7 years later, the pattern he described is still in motion. Those people are still out there, millions of them. And some of them are not waiting for Microsoft to fix this. They are making a different choice.